Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This should be a fairly short video on environmental law, an aspect of the legal environment. So we're conducting our PESTLE analysis, looking for opportunities and threats in the external environment, and you need to be aware of the impact of environmental legislation. So I'm going to do this really quickly because I've made a video on the political environment and how UK government policy in terms of the environment affects businesses. So all I'm going to do in this one is just give you some examples of environmental laws. So these first three all come from the EU. Now when the EU passes a directive, that supersedes British law, and you know, I'm recording this in August 2017. The UK is still part of the EU at the moment, although shortly Brexit will be negotiated. But at the moment, EU law has supremacy, and so the UK companies are bound by things like the Environmental Impact Directive, which requires private sector projects to do things like an environmental analysis of the impact of, say, building a new road or building a new railway, or let's say building a housing estate on some previous farming land or something like that. Okay, we've got to do an environmental impact assessment to see what effect we're going to have on the local environment if we do that. Will wildlife be affected, etc. Another law is related to industrial emissions. Industrial emissions industrial emissions concern things like carbon emissions, other waste gases, and this is part of the EU emissions trading scheme, which aims to bring down, through issuing carbon permits, the total amount of emissions made every year. So that affects British companies as well. The EU directive on waste and electrical and electronic equipment concerns the recycling of electronic equipment once it comes towards the end of its life. There's plenty more of environmental laws. You don't need to know any of them in particular for the specification, but what you do need to know is that environmental laws affect UK businesses and will impact upon their decision making. You know, these in effect create the opportunities and threats in the external environment. Finally, one from the government is the Climate Change Act, which requires reporting of emissions data by UK firms. So the UK government has committed through Kyoto to reduce their total emissions that the UK makes, and British companies are required to report on their emissions as part of trying to get them reduced overall. So the Climate Change Act affects that. Now, if you think about opportunities that are presented as we move towards a lower carbon environment, plenty of opportunities in terms of renewable energies for companies, opportunities to save money through becoming more environmentally friendly. You know, trying to become get a reputation, a USP as being the most environmentally friendly firm business in the market can be a source of competitive advantage. Threats include things like, you know, well, I want to build this new housing estate. You know, there's a very rare newt in the area. How will my housing estate affect the newt? Is this going to have an impact on our ability to build this new housing estate because we're going to damage the local wildlife? So, you know, and just the threat of fines being issued as a result of not complying with laws or not keeping up with changes in these laws, and therefore there are costs to be incurred to adhere to these laws. So there's some examples of environmental laws and the opportunities and costs, the opportunities and threats, presented by them.